Hello BookTube, I'm Vanessa and today I'm here to do my January wrap-up. The first thing that I read in January was I finished reading The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was so beautiful and like whimsical and just a really good fantasy book, but it also had this like depth and nuance to it that made it feel like very literary and very serious while also still being this like lighthearted, playful thing. And I just can't imagine how a book got such a good, perfect balance. I was super impressed by The Golden Compass, but then after that I started to read The Subtle Knife, which is the sequel, and I actually DNF'd it probably less than a third of the way in just because, I don't know, all of the things that made The Golden Compass so great felt like they weren't there anymore. The second book just kind of shifted gears entirely, and instead of being like fantasy and whimsy based, it was more like almost science fiction. It was very technical and very scientific. Instead of the almost childlike sense of adventure that was in The Golden Compass, it moved into kind of this really philosophical discussion about very serious, very adulty and grown-up concepts, which is fine. I'm a grown-up. I also like to read serious things too, but I miss what The Golden Compass had set me up for, and then The Subtle Knife didn't have it anymore. I don't know. I do see myself coming back to this trilogy someday in the future. I'm just not really in the mood for it right now. The next thing that I read in January was Into the Bright Unknown by Rae Carson, which is the last book in the Gold Seer trilogy. This trilogy is really, really good. It's about a girl who has the ability to sense where gold is in the ground. And the first book starts off with her living in Tennessee, and her parents have done as well as they can to keep her ability a secret, but her uncle knows about it and he wants to use her for her powers, so she has to escape from him, and she decides to go on the Oregon Trail to get to California and get away from him. The story is exciting and the characters are lovable, and one other thing that I really like about this is that Rae Carson was very aware in her writing of the bad things that were going on during this time period, and the books acknowledge and even have a lot of side stories dealing with things like slavery or freed slaves moving west, as well as the exploitation of Native Americans and the Chinese during the gold rush in California. So the time period is definitely not overly romanticized in these books. So overall, I really liked this series and I would definitely recommend it to people. And then the next thing I read was Sever by Lauren De Stefano, which is the final book in the Chemical Garden trilogy. This trilogy is about a future where they have created a cure for like all sorts of diseases and defects and like anything that could go wrong, and the first generation that received this cure is doing real good. They're living to be like 80, 90, they never get sick. They're great, but all of their children and their children's children have this thing where they get violently ill with a fever at the age of 20 or 25 for girls and boys, and they die. So as you can imagine, society is crumbling, and the story follows the main character, Ryan, who is a girl who gets kidnapped and sold into a polygamous marriage, which is a thing that happens now. This is a series that I really liked when I was like 20, and so I wanted to reread it and see if it still held up, and I don't know. I mean, the first book was still definitely very enjoyable and very fun to read, but to be honest, the second and third books are like nothing happens plot-wise. Like all of these events and actions happen, but at the end of everything, they might as well not have. Also, there is one character in the series, a girl named Cecily, who is so amazingly written. She's so complex and she has these layers and she's kick-ass, and her attitude and personality are so vibrant and bright and fun to read about. But she's a side character, and all of the main characters are like really boring, flat cardboard cutouts of people. And another thing that I realized upon a second reading is that these books deal with a lot of really serious things. For example, sex trafficking, polygamy, creepy experimentation on non-consenting subjects, a consensual sexual relationship and pregnancy between a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old, I believe. Actually, he's probably even older than that. I imagine he's like 21. He's a grown-ass man and all of his wives are under 18. There's also like a creepy sex carnival where girls are kidnapped and like sold into prostitution, and I don't know, it was a lot, and I know that it's a YA and it doesn't treat any of those things heavily. They all come off as very like, that's happening, which I can't decide if that's better or worse than if it had treated those things like the horrible monstrosities that they are. And I said 14, but I think the sister wife who actually gets pregnant is like 13 when it happens. I really don't know why Lauren De Stefano thought that was a cute thing to put in a YA book. I just, like, I get that it's a dystopian apocalypse world and things are different. You're dying when you turn 20, so obviously shit's gonna happen a little bit earlier. But I feel like a 13-year-old being pregnant is too much for me. So anyways, be all that as it may, I still think the first book was interesting and I still enjoyed it. And the second and third books, I guess they're kind of good junk food reads if you just want to finish the series. Why not? But ultimately, I don't think this series was put together with an expert hand, if you know what I mean. Okay, the next thing that I read in January was The Dead Queen's Club by Hannah Capin. This book is a new release that just came out and it is a retelling of King Henry VIII and his wives in a modern high school setting, and it is amazing. The story is like a high school drama meets a YA thriller, and there's tons of really fun historical references, and I also thought it did a good job of discussing topics that the target audience, teenage girls, will benefit from reading about. Like, it talks about slut shaming and victim blaming and what consent actually is. I thought it was a really good book, and I actually have a full spoiler-free review out of this in case you want to get some more details about what it's all about. But the last book that I finished in January was Aragon. I've been rereading Aragon with Kelsey from Kelsey Reads, and it has been so great. I read Aragon in high school, but I never read the last two. But I don't know how many books are even in the series, but I only read up to Brissinger. So I am really excited to go back and revisit this series. And actually, it's held up pretty well in my opinion. I was a little bit nervous because I know this is one of like the earlier books in the YA fantasy genre, as well as the fact that I think Christopher Paolini was like 16 or something when he wrote it. But I'm actually still super impressed by it. Obviously there are some things that are kind of tropey and kind of predictable. Overall, it still reads to me as like a really impressive, really complex, detailed fantasy story with a whole made-up world and made-up languages and different races and like political factions and drama and intrigue and elves and dwarves and like battles happening. It's freaking good, and I'm so excited to be reading the next book with Kelsey in February. Okay, so I think that is it for my January wrap up. Let me know in the comments what you read in January, or let me know if you've had any reread experiences that were either like really good, like Aragon, or really bad, like the Chemical Garden trilogy for me. I would love to know what your rereading experiences have been. And other than that, I hope that you liked this video. If you did, you can go ahead and give it a little thumbs up because that really helps me. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, you could do that too if you wanted to. I make new videos every Monday and Thursday talking about books, and I would love to talk to you about books. So I hope that I get to hear from you soon. Bye!